Showtime.
All right. Third show of 3 this week, previewing our picks for the 2024 CrossFit Games. 2 days ago, we had the women's picks. Yesterday, we did the team picks, 1 through 40 for the women, 1 through 30 for the teams. And today we have what I think it's unanimous decision or agreement that the men's field for the 2024 CrossFit Games is ridiculously deep, ridiculously talented and fit, and extremely difficult to rank. My picks are out on B.Friendly Fitness. For the last couple hours, we've gotten a ton of comments and questions, which is awesome and justified. I mean, if you're a fan of the sport of CrossFit and you're looking at this list that I put out, or anyone's list that is put out there, you're going to see a couple things that rub you the wrong way, because each of us have our own personal favorites. Maybe we've seen these people compete more, we're from that part of the world, or we just really like them. And then, of course, you may have your opinions about people who've overperformed in the past and are going to have a regression, or the other way around. And then we have a ton of athletes in this field that have some experience at the games, but weren't there last year. Actually, a fair number of those as well. Joining us, we got PC. PC will have his picks today as well, alongside mine. We'll put those up there. And then we got Mike Halpin from Known Knowable, who's going to put us to the grindstone, ask us the tough questions, highlight the discrepancies between our picks, and make us justify the ones that he thinks are most outlandish, surprising.
I'm really speaking for the people here. So
the people.
All these people in the comments, for sure.
Melanie here on time today. Had to be hard. Absolutely was, but also fun to do it. Draw your dagger. Oh, okay. He's expecting a Bailey Martin pick from PC to win the games. Let's see. And Jason's here. Missed the women's and teams live. Made it for the men's. Arguably the most unpredictable this year. Yep, I think that is fair to say. There's a huge contingency of men that have a lot to offer. And when you look on paper at almost the entire field, you can make an argument that they can be better than wherever I have them ranked in almost every case. But that can't be the case. We talk about it all the time, and I think it's good to say it off the bat, is there's 40 spots, and it's a different man's going to occupy every one of those spots.
Hey, before we start, Brian, can we do some shameless plugs?
Yeah, of course. Whatever you want.
What's not really shameless? I want Mike to talk about this.
Oh, yeah. Caroline Lambre was on the Talking Elite Fitness podcast, or with Lauren doing their show, and she threw out this idea. I was watching the Olympics. Multitasking there, and I thought this was a great idea. And at first I was just like, I kind of wanted this slide, the countries, just because of sort of the Olympic medal race here, and you can sort of read between the lines on some of these countries that I picked. And then the camp one, Caroline brought it up. It made sense. I'm not trying to compete with Dave. Dave obviously runs the entire CrossFit Games, so whatever he says goes. But I think to that extent of what I heard Caroline and Justin Kotler and O'Keefe talk about on that show is really but there's weight in what Dave says as well. So just Dave saying, hey, we might try this flippant idea of giving an award off the cuff to some athletes or some camps, it means a lot. So with this version, again, not trying to compete, but with this version, it's really just going to look at total medals for whatever camps. Krypton I threw on there for Laura and Gabby. Underdogs would be on there. There's no minimums. There's no anything. So teams is all, and this actually comes from our conversation yesterday. Teams would also be included. I kind of had to do a little fact finding. There's quite a few Mayhem teams. There's quite a few Krieger teams. So Krieger would show up here if they win some events. I wanted to make sure that when I threw it out there, I wasn't just going to be handing Mayhem a free option. But, and I don't mean anything against Mayhem. I'm really only locking in on first, second, third. So if Roman wins an event, he'll be on here as Mayhem, so on and so on. If one of the Mayhem teams wins an event, they would be on here. so on and so on. So similar to the Olympics that's going on right now, if your country or if whoever you fly the flag for is sort of the way I'm looking at this, wins an event or places top 3 in an event, you'll show up here. In the last day or so, it's turned into a little bit something further. There's still a lot to be figured out, but what we're shooting for is, well, first of all, Caroline, she wanted to put her name behind it. So this is now sponsored by CrossFit Wonderland. So that's pretty cool. And then I've reached out to a lot of the camps. I've gotten some good feedback so far. If what I'm hoping to do is by the end of this, crown a camp champion under my version. Dave can do whatever he wants. Camp champ, and that camp is hopefully going to be giving away some merch or some programming or whatever they want to do to celebrate through this. So exciting stuff.
I think it's great. And yeah, I mean, you can have a ton of representation at the field at the games, which Mayhem obviously will have. But if you don't have those top performances, then, you know, you wouldn't get recognized necessarily in this system. Similarly, you could have some athletes that have really, really good performances at the games and specific events. And then, you know, they're not good enough or well-rounded enough to podium by the end of the competition. These are probably athletes that are finishing, you know, 5th through 15th, but may rack up 2 event wins over the course of the weekend. And then they get to contribute to their team in that regard. So I think it's very cool. I think it's, you know, from the little that Dave has shared compared to what you just shared, this seems like it's a little bit more easy to follow, a little bit more well thought out up to this point. But Dave may have some stuff in mind that we don't know about yet. So this will be a nice way to kind of keep track throughout, and then also to, you know, potentially ask him a question whenever that award comes out, like what were his criteria, and then compare it to ours or yours.
Yeah, Mike, is this something you'll update daily or after each event at the games?
After each event would, well, we got to see that schedule, right? But yeah, daily for sure.
Nice short days on Friday and Saturday, it looks like.
No, not at all.
Of course.
13-hour days for all of us, huh?
For you guys. I'll just be back home.
But you'll have easy. I'm sure you have easy days out there, doing whatever you're doing.
You know, we saw this yesterday. We kind of discussed it, and you know, of course, you made it happen. So, if you're not following Known and Knowable right now, you should definitely. It'll be really cool. He's got a lot of cool stuff coming for the game, so we appreciate it, Halpin. We
can just clarify this, Jason. So would it be the camp with the most top 3 finishes wins rather than the top 3 athletes from each camp?
Yeah, that's the basics. It would be the total on the right would be what I would be going.
Are the golds weighted more than silver, weighted more than bronze, or is it just like
coming up in the Olympics itself right now? It's like you just count like whoever got the most medal, or do you count golds? Or so I haven't really thought of it. I think everything's worth the same, right? When it comes to medal count.
Did you consider using the
country that's doing the promotion?
Did you consider using galleons, shekels, and knuts instead of gold, silver, and bronze?
I'm just waiting to get a cease and desist if they own a medal race or anything like that. I shied away from using any logos or their actual music. I used somebody else.
You could revert back to middle school with red, blue, and white ribbons.
Yeah, right. I'll just be swim medals. I'll just have different ribbons.
Anyway, really cool. And I think to Jason's question, yes, you know, that's the way that we're going to keep tally here. And therefore, you don't have to be, having a big team gives you more opportunity, but you still need to have those athletes that can have great performances. And that's what happens at the Olympics.
Yeah. And I got the same question about like the USA with just how many, and this might be segues into some of these athletes here on the men's side. Just USA having half the field, or at least North America really sort of having half the field just out of process. I don't know. Tia and Ricky are back. I put Australia there at the top for a reason. There's on that next
when you're
slide.
talking about like event wins is something that's tracked. You don't often hear much about 2nd and 3rd place finishes at the CrossFit Games.
And they do add up. Yeah.
There are years that we've referenced it. In 2016, you know, everyone kind of knows that Fraser won one event, but had 7 second place finishes. That's one of the few examples in CrossFit Games history where you'll hear people actually talk about a succession of finishes that weren't first.
Yeah. I've gotten that question. And then my answer is I don't know. I will ask him or somebody around him. I will respect whatever flag they want to fly, is what I'll say about some athletes. So I understand CrossFit lists like Tia as in the United States. I would say that she'd probably fly Australia, but Roman on the other side of that, I will. If he wants the Mayhem flag on there, I'll put it on.
Yeah, and that's what's typically happened in the past. Like Tia, if and when she wins the games, she'll have an Australian flag. She will not have a U.S. flag or even a Nashville or a Tennessee flag. So
if Semenoff wants a Russian flag, though, I am not sanctioned by this is not official for CrossFit, so I can fly.
Yeah. It's also, even though CrossFit doesn't make a big deal about it like the Olympics does, like if you watch these Olympic swimming races, the person who finishes third, like the announcer gets really excited for them. Just to take a medal at the Olympics is amazing. At the games, there is a prize purse incentive built into a top 3 finish. It doesn't get talked about too often, but this format allows for, like Jason is saying here, us to have another kind of reason, so to speak, to highlight those really good finishes that aren't necessarily an event win, because you might end up having a Justin Medeiros 2021 situation where we're coming to the last day, he hasn't won a single event, but we still might say, yeah, but he's medaled 4 times, whatever it was.
Right.
Yeah.
Affiliates count on here too, by the way, in case anybody asks. So whatever you're flying the flag of is what I'm going off of.
One last order of business is that we are proud to announce that we have B.Friendly Fitness as an official games food partner, and that would be Asian Flavor Punch. If you guys don't know who they are, if you've been to a semifinal, more than likely you've probably had one of their bowls.
Just a semifinal, man. They're all over the place.
Yeah. And the cool thing about it is they're based out of Katy, Texas, so it's almost local. But they're someone that Brian has a personal relationship and someone that, it's just great. So we want to send a shout out to Asian Flavor Punch. We're excited to have them. They're going to have 2 locations in Vendor Village for people to get their food. They do breakfast bowls. They do regular teriyaki and a chicken bowl. I think, teriyaki is amazing.
These guys, it's a family business. They are on the road grinding all year round. They drive to every competition they go to in the U.S. And yes, that means that they drove to California for the West Coast semifinal and then to Knoxville in the same week for the East semifinal. They do stuff like this all the time. You see a picture of them there. In California, this is their first time going to the CrossFit Games, and similarly to content creators, coaches, athletes, whatever. I've talked to them about it. It's a big deal for them to be there, and they have an opportunity this year at the biggest stage competition. So very happy to be working with them. And if you haven't, like PC said, if you haven't checked them out before and you're in Fort Worth, it's a great option during busy and long days.
Yeah, and like I said, they'll have 2. They realize, like we saw it at Syndicate Crown, where they had a line at. Not Syndicate Crown. Well, at Syndicate Crown, but at West Coast, they had a line that wrapped around like half of the tennis stadium for their stuff. So they'll have 2 spots in Vendor Village, and they're also going to debut their famous teriyaki in a bottle. So you'll be able to purchase, and we're hoping maybe to do some type of giveaway with them. We'll probably be filming some stuff there, obviously, and they'll be keeping us fed throughout the game. So a shout out to the Asian Flavor Punch. We're excited about. Anything that's food related, I'm down for. So, and plus they're just great people, locally owned, mom and pop shop. It's awesome. So keep an eye out for them. If you're in Texas, make sure you at least swing by, get one of their famous breakfast bowls or one of the teriyaki or chicken bowls. So, all right. So should we jump right into it, Brian?
Yep, Mike, absolutely.
All right, we're gonna go right
into it. It's gonna be a good one.
Yep. All right. So this is what we're gonna do. We're going to stop with 29 through 21, 39 through 21.
Okay.
Yeah, 39 men in the games field this year, missing one from Asia, which is unfortunately a pattern. And I think it is worth talking about. This is one of the things that I've brought up over the years when people are talking about games distribution spots, is just to look at the trends and patterns, whether it's placements at the games or even being able to show up there. And unfortunately, about every year, there's at least an athlete or a team or 2 that are unable to make the trip from Asia for whatever reason. In this case, there was a drug failure and an inability to get a visa. Last year, we had a visa that was unable to be processed. We've had guys that have just chosen not to show up, like Stas Soledov back in 2021, who won that competition. And I do think that that's something that CrossFit should kind of factor in when they're evaluating these decisions year by year. Why not look at the last 3 to 5 years and see what the patterns have been, and then either try to find a solution to that or account for it. It's the World Championships. It's the biggest event, and be nice to have a full field here. And once again, we don't.
Yeah. And what you're probably going to end up seeing on the leaderboard, what they've done past year, is that he will be listed as 40th. So 40th he'll probably be listed on the leaderboard, and he'll be in last, and he'll just have no results. So they've done that in the past with other athletes. Specifically, they've done it with Roman, I think, once or twice. So, yeah. So
we already have PC. I have a first question for you. I'm a little bit surprised. I did not think you would have Ruan last. I thought that you would have a little bit more love for this guy.
I do. I love how tough he is. But again, we're going to say this so many times. Top to bottom, it's just a tough field. And again, and kind of like with the women, when we talked about like the known events, Ruan isn't traditionally known as a great runner. And what we know so far are that there's a lot of running events in the first 7 events. And I think he might do pretty well relative to the field and Chad, because I just think he's one of those tough athletes. He showed that in the final event and semifinals, where he went unbroken with the lunges and just kind of stood there and soaked it all in. Yeah, it was kind of tough, but again, I don't know. It's one of those things where he's a games rookie, and I don't know. It's either it's better to put that. I've learned from the past, and Brian, you'll remember this with the games rookies when I predicted Jason Hopper would do very well his first year, and kind of learned my lesson from that.
Yeah, and Jason Hopper, of course, that year was coming off of an incredible performance at a semifinal that had a lot of people thinking we might be in line to see something incredibly special from him. See if we can do this. I wanted to, similarly with the women, as we're just looking at this bottom part of the leaderboard here, wanted to give you guys some perspective on when it comes to rookies in the field. So looking at the last 3 seasons, we would have had 11 this year as well if the last man from Asia could make it. So it seems to be, as I've said many times, it's usually about a 75% return and 25% turnover rate. In 2021, there were a lot less athletes, like 6 athletes that didn't show up or withdrew pretty early in the competition. So you can add a couple points here. But there's been kind of an up and down. Wow, this is out of order, isn't it? These should be 2023. This should be 2023 on the left.
That's 2023. Yeah.
And 2021 on the right.
Yeah.
That's tripping my mind out now. Why did I do that? Anyway, you can see that it's difficult for rookies in the games to crack into the top 10. 9, 10, 14 being the top 3, and you have 2, 3, and 4 athletes out of 11. So, a third of the field or less that are making it inside the top 10, and about half of those guys are finishing right at the bottom there. So when we get to talking to the rookies throughout, just kind of keep in mind that there is some context behind this. It's really difficult for rookies in the men's side right now to push into that top 10, and even making the cut is a really good competition for male rookies right now at the CrossFit Games.
Yeah, and I wrote an article about that, looking all the way back to 2009. At least one in all of those years, men and women, at least, I think we talked about this on the women's show, at least one athlete made the top 10. I don't think that happens this year. I mean, I think your picks sort of prove that out a little bit. It's just so stacked. Like, I'm hoping that a good amount of them make the first cut. But like beyond Saturday midday, it'll be hard to say how many rookies get this far. So, and I don't know where we want to jump to, but I just locked eyes with Austin Hatfield, 29th PC. Yeah. There's some other shows that are putting him maybe into that top 10 conversation.
I know,
so
and
you went the opposite direction.
I made nothing against Austin Hatfield, but the thing is, here's my question: I'm getting a lot of grief regarding Austin Hatfield, but you tell me why Austin Hatfield should be in the top, the top 20 or top 10. What have you seen from him? that makes you think that he's better than some of these other people that some people are rating higher than. Is Austin Hatfield better than BKG? Is he better than the Yellow Hostas out there? Is he better than Annual Akai?
I don't. He showed out well at a very competitive North America East, and I think a lot of people, and we're obviously friends.
He finished 8th there.
Yeah.
If you if you look, I made this little graphic here.
Yeah.
He did have some good performances, but ultimately he finished 8th. These are the rookies in the last 3 years and their finishes at semifinals compared to, and then you see the rookies this year and their finishes at semifinals. Clearly, in some of those years, there were less athletes competing. So if you look at 2021 and 2022, you basically want to double the number for the European and North American semifinals to approximate for what it would have been in 2023. So you see Lazar getting 2nd. That's probably a 3rd or a 4th. Houdet getting 4th is probably more like an 8th or 10th. So if you're looking at athletes that would finish 8th, or in this range at a semifinal, look at last year, that's like a Luke Parker. That's the relative performance that he had in the East. And Luke Parker did not make the second final cut last year. If you go back a couple of the years before that, and you look at guys with a 3, 4, or 5 next to their name, Cole Griesaber and Tudor Magda, similarly didn't make it out of the first round of cuts at the games. They were in the bottom 10. If you're looking at North American men from previous years in that range, you have Zach Watts, Colton Mertens, again, guys who struggled in that year. So that finishing 8th at a North American East semifinal does not have a good track record for doing very well at the games. Making the top 20 from that qualifying position would be a good competition for Austin Hatfield.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to say maybe insinuate. This is a great graphic. And that does help straighten me out a little bit. I was trying to really just say, similar to maybe on the women's field, where you have like a field that has Tia and Emma and folks like that in it, seeing a rookie do even qualifying against that field or within that field is something. But yeah, what they then do with it after that. Now, the other thing that I think most people look at is they see that Austin Hatfield at Crash Crucible. I was going to switch. Crucible?
Yeah.
Sorry, JR. Beat Colton Mertens. And that was
Jack
October.
Roseman.
And Jack Roseman. There you go.
Which, by the way, if you look at Wodapalooza, Mertens, Hatfield, Rosema finished 13, 14, 15. So if you're approximating what kind of an athlete Austin Hatfield is, you can say this all you want. He did hold his own at a semi where half the workouts were for big guys. Rosema beat him there. So it's cutting margins between those 3 competitions, semifinals, Wodapalooza, and Crucible. You got a win for Rosema, a win for Mertens, and a win for Hatfield. Colton Mertens is a well-known commodity in CrossFit, and we know that at the CrossFit Games, finishing between 18th and 23rd is very reasonable for Colton Mertens right now. And Hatfield has shown the similar capacity to Mertens at a variety of different competitions, and I think that rating him drastically outside of that range is probably a mistake. So I would say that Hatfield's low on PC's rankings here, and anyone who has him above 16, 17 is probably overestimating his value based on what we've seen so far.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not buying into the hype because I don't try not to buy in the hype of rookies after being so high on Jason Hopper, 4 years ago. And then just like I saw Austin in semifinals, a lot of people are putting they're basing their opinion on Crash Crucible, which, by the way, Crash Crucible is a great competition. But again,
it's not comparable to the games though.
Exactly, or semifinals, and it showed at semifinals. And this argument, like who was it, Jason, that said about big guys? Jack Rosema, finished 5th.
Where?
Rosema at semifinals.
I think 6th. I think.
Yeah, 5th or 6th, and it was by an easy margin. So I just don't like those comparisons. And again, I'm just taking a little bit more cautious feel. And nothing against Austin Hatfield. Again, I think he is a very talented athlete. But what did Colton Mertens finish his rookie year?
28th or 9th, I think it's in here.
Yeah,
Mertens, 31st, excuse me, 31st.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I'm looking at. So
that's not,
a lot of people, it's no slight on him, it's no slight on anybody. It's just is where I think he's at. A lot,
Yeah, I think that if Colton was in the games, where would you have him finishing?
Colton, probably anywhere from between 23 and 17, maybe.
Right. So you would put the stuff, and I would say that the kind of workouts that we know on paper for the early half of the competition are better for Hatfield than Mertens. But Hatfield's still gonna. I expect him to make the first cut and be on the bubble for the second cut. But as the competition wears on, there's some other variables that come into play at the CrossFit Games that he's never experienced before.
Exactly, as a rookie, because again, he finished 8th in a basically essentially a 3-day competition with one event on the first day, with 6 workouts. Now you're talking about, and believe me, if he does probably have that. Most of these athletes have that capacity, but it's just a different animal. And he is fortunate. He does have the mayhem machine to kind of back him and help him out. He's going to be a crowd favorite. But right now, there's been a lot of athletes that people in the media have kind of, especially rookies, that put their hats on, overhyped them, and they've fallen on their face. Whether not falling on their face, that's a bad way of saying it, but they just haven't produced, whether it be for injury or for whatever reason. So that's why, again, nothing against Austin, but there is and I'll bring it up. John Young has it in his top 10. John Young's a proponent of him, and that's great. I love that.
John Young was barely able to defend having him at 10th as soon as Chase started listing off names for him. And John even conceded that he's probably more like a 13 to 16, 17 type of a guy. Yeah. And I would say that's the upper end of the potential for Hatfield based on his experience and the experience of this games field.
Well, and we had it in the women's show, right? I mean, PC, you had Sahir Kaya at 13th. So there are people that put their name and put something behind some of these athletes. In certain cases, it's because they're working with them throughout the days. In other cases, just they've had good conversations with them. They saw them at Crash. They saw them at Wadapalooza, things like that. There's a consistency of just seeing them perform.
I mean, dude, if you
enough,
if you listen to Andrew on his show yesterday, he says, you're crazy if you don't pick Ricky or Garrard to win the CrossFit Games. And I can tell you that because I spent 2 days with him. There's a handful of athletes that if you spent 2 days with him, you're going to walk away from that weekend and say, holy shit, no one's beating this guy. And that's every athlete that's training for the games right now. If you go and spend 2 or 3 days with them, I don't care who they are or where they are on our lists, you're going to leave there with an expectation of them to do 5 to 10 spots better than they're probably going to do.
Yeah. And I admitted to that. And the thing is, and I call it the Hiller effect, where Hiller's doing a great job producing all this stuff. But anything that Hiller does, and he puts his stamp of approval on it, especially people gravitate. I mean, a lot of people are moving up Abigail Domit just based off of a lot of them didn't realize that she won West Coast Classic, but they saw his documentary and they're like, oh, she seems cool, and he talks really high of her. I think she's going to be top 10.
Well, and outside of an injury, Bill Leahy was supposed to be winning the CrossFit Games.
Exactly.
I think there's plenty of hype that we should have more media. We should have more media putting things behind athletes for sure. And I like what Hiller's doing with any of these. I watched most of them, but that's just people get into that cycle of just okay, I've heard this name more than I've heard all the other rookie names.
Yeah.
Therefore they must be the best rookie. I've heard this name more than I've heard some of the others in recently. They must be the best athlete. Yeah. And I spend 48 hours, 72 hours with whoever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the hype is there, but the CrossFit Games is the CrossFit Games. I think it's Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So that's the sort of punch in the face that is just sort of no, the rookies aren't going to. Good for them making it. They're not going to do that well this year. It's the top 10, it's the podium, it's wherever. If you're going to put one of them there, take somebody out, as you said that Chase was explaining to John. It's just well, who are you trying to say? Now, to get back to the list here, and this is where maybe I was thinking, I think everybody has some sort of bias. I have definitely a recency bias around the semifinals because it's the last time we saw them compete. So when I see PC, your ranking of Jack Rosema over Hatfield, I sort of get it. Brian, to that extent, you have Rosema at 25. I'm guessing you have Hatfield in your 20s because he's not here. So where would you start to like line up these athletes if Austin beat Jack at the Crash at Crash, and then they did similarly at Wadapalooza? What jumps Hatfield up a few places?
Yeah, I mean,
All right.
just in general, I would say that I think that there is some risk in solely looking at the semifinals and then projecting towards the games. And we had we've had a couple of questions here. Tell us about Cole Greasaber in the bottom 10, for example. Cole Greasaber has routinely now performed better at the semifinal stage than at the CrossFit Games stage. And there's some athletes that's going to be the case for. In the European side, Henrik Kapalainen has been that guy. Why does it always happen? Henrik Kapalainen has been that guy where he's having these second and third place finishes at semifinals, and he can't crack the top 15 at the games. I love Cole Greasaber. I've had a tremendous amount of excitement in terms of watching him progress and develop as an athlete. I was disappointed in 2020 because he was at the Atlas Games and I didn't get to see him compete there. Dallin Pepper was there as well, and that would have been my first chance to kind of see him compete live, and obviously it was postponed for a while. But both of them kind of continued on the trajectory that I expected, which is to be good enough to compete for and qualify to the CrossFit Games. I've always thought that Dallin Pepper had final heat potential at the games. I haven't thought that yet about Cole Greasaber, and based on what we've seen from him at the games 2 years ago, and what I've seen from him in terms of competing elsewhere since then, there's nothing that I've seen yet that shows me that he's taken that next step forward. That doesn't mean that he won't, but his pedigree at the games against the elite competition field is low. He had 2 great finishes 2 years ago. Those are on the swimming workout, and he's an amazing swimmer. And I think it was on Elevated Elizabeth. Everyone saw that he can crush a handstand walking event, so he does have home run potential. But he also had several finishes in the bottom 10, including a couple 39s. And massive hits like that over and over again are just not the recipe for success at the games.
Yeah, and I mean, I was looking at that before we got on the show. Like, you ranked him. What did you rank him?
Greasaber?
Oh, yeah, I just want to make sure I say it right.
34.
Okay, 34th. He was
PCS
33rd the last 2 years. Like I think some of these people have these ideas of athletes. They saw him at semifinals. As John's saying, semifinals and the games are different. That goes both ways. Like, people may just forget what happened a year ago or forget what happened a year before that when they look at this and kind of go like, why is this person so low? It's like, well, like, they've been 33rd the last 2 years that they've been there. Like, look at Colton Mertens. He does place around a certain area every year he shows up. Like, how are you getting this sudden hype around him being the people's champ when it's like, yeah, he goes and he may qualify to the final stage? Like I just don't get it sometimes when people are like saying like, okay, where did these rankings come from? And it's just sort of like, look at how they did last year. Look at how they did before that. Look at who they competed against to get here this year. What suddenly do you think they did differently? Or what suddenly do you think a rookie is going to do differently against a field that is a meat grinder? Like, there are killers in the top. There are true Mike Tysons in the top, John. And like, they're not just going to be like, oh, I'm sorry, Austin. Right. Here you go. Like, have at it. Like there's just some of these rankings I see, and thankfully I don't put my own out. I was part of the spin one if he wants to release all of those. So like, as far as that goes, like, it's just funny to me sometimes. But we all have rankings. I have ones in my head where it's just sort of like the same thing of just like recency bias. You pick favorites. Hopefully.
All right, let's see here. PC, you are extremely low on Harry Lightfoot, the 3rd to last year. He had a pretty impressive showing at semifinals, did fade a little bit towards the end of the competition. Thoughts?
I love Harry. I think, you know how much I like him as a person. And I think that's another thing where I'm trying not to have that bias. And that might've been me consciously not having a biased pick, but I just think he's maybe not ready yet, for the games. And if anyone in that 30 through 39 group I think will prove me wrong, it's him. But right now, I just think he's not ready there. And I grouped him in there with like Callum Clements, Peter Ellis, like those young rookies who I think they're just going to get overwhelmed maybe in some aspect. especially those first seven workouts. I just don't know if Harry, he has that rugby mentality, which I think will help him. But at the end of the day, I just think that he's probably not going to make it out of that bottom tier of 35 to 39. So he just ended up in 37, just kind of by the process of elimination.
This is where things really start to get tough, because he finished one spot ahead of Mertens, Hatfield, and Rosema, or 1, 2, and 3 spots ahead of them at Wadapalooza. So he's kind of in that mix. He finished in a very similar spot in Europe to where those guys finished in the North America East and West. He took 8th, Hatfield was 8th, Mertens ended up like 10th, I guess, or 9th, or whatever it was, and Rosema was 6th. So his kind of pedigree over the last 2 competitions is very similar to those guys. So why have him lower? And part of it is there just have to be guys that are lower. The other thing that I think really shines when you look at Harry's semifinal performance and his Wadapalooza performance is that very rarely was like pure strength tested. And I think that's the limiter for Harry Lightfoot. He's shown his capacity to be exceptional. But I do think you look at the 29th and 27th on the last 2 events at the semifinal, and that strength limitation is what I think gets exposed compared to guys like Austin Hatfield, Jack Rosema, who we know have some strength to back up their capacity as well. I think being strong at the CrossFit Games is more important than it is at any other stage of the season, and definitely than it is at Wadapalooza. So I think that his performances in those stages are a little bit inflated relative to what he can do at the games. You see, I have him very close on the cut line at 31. I think that that's probably closer to where he finished than the 37, but I do think that there's some actual justification based on his skill sets to keep him a little bit lower down the leaderboard from some guys that he's had similar performances to already this year.
Yeah. That's just how, kind of like you said, that's just how it felt. Again, it's no personal shot at him. I like him. I think he's going to be one of those guys you're going to see at the games continuously, especially in the current format, because he is one of the best athletes in Europe, and probably the best athlete. Maybe with Shrunky can have an argument with it in the UK. So, yeah.
We can't go much longer than getting to Chris Ibarra here. John Young, Ibarra will be our biggest difference in the rankings. Ryan Talbot, I think Ibarra outperforms all the rookies. He flies under the media radar. Ibarra 6th at semis in a big guy competition, referencing the programming at semifinals. Ryan Talbot, he hung with the veterans at semis better than any other rookie. Brian has him way too low. Asking John where he has him. I don't know if John's responded yet. I also don't know if John's changed his rankings since the last time he put him out yet. But Chris Ibarra, when I look at my own list, is the one that I would criticize as being a questionable pick down here at 35th. I could definitely see him doing much better than that. But he surprised me at semifinals. And similarly to Hattie Canyo, I just think that the workouts worked out really well for them, and that the momentum that they gained early on was something they were able to ride throughout a really impressive and good weekend. That does not guarantee me that they're going to be able to do the same thing at semifinals. So I'm fading on Canyo and Ibarra relative to the semifinal performances. I understand people that are not doing that and are validating that, and using it as justification for it. I like a lot of the guys in the 21 through 30 range based on experience and strength more than some of these guys in the 31 through 39 range. Those are the 2 main limiters at the games, I think, is how do you navigate the weekend and how strong are you? And most of the guys that I have in the bottom are there for that reason. The exception would be, he's not even an exception. Cole Sager, not strong enough anymore to necessarily keep up with the field, despite obviously being a legend of the sport.
There is one thing I want to say before we move on here, and this is more about Austin Hatfield, not in terms of his ranking where I have him, but just him being a top 15 or top 10 athlete. Is like, there's only been the modern era of CrossFit, and I'm saying 2014 to now. There's only been 9 rookies in the men's field that finished top 10. Do you want to hear that list of rookies?
That's a very, very impressive list
for everybody else. Yeah.
Matt Fraser, Noah Olson, Patrick Vellner, Brent Fikowski. We can count Ricky Garrard in 2017, or we can eliminate him, so that'd make it 8. But Ricky in 2017 was a rookie. Willie George in 2018. Matt McLeod in 2019. We can not. If you remove Ricky and Matt McLeod, then that list becomes even shorter. But Matt McLeod, Justin Medeiros in 2020, the Ranch Games, and then last year at Yellow Hosta. So to put a rookie in the top 10 in the men's field, that's that's a pretty stacked group. We're talking probably 6 to 7 if there's a CrossFit Hall of Fame, and these are Hall of Famers. So, that's kind of one reason why I'm not valuing a rookie. And again, nothing against Austin. I think in this field of rookies, he's not even the strongest rookie in my opinion. Obviously, you've seen in my rankings in terms of overall fitness, but he's really good. But again, to just kind of anoint him the king as a rookie or the next games champion as a rookie, that's putting a lot of pressure on someone that probably doesn't deserve that pressure right now. But
Mike,
hey, more
Yeah.
power to you, John Young. But that's, if he does, good for you, and that's an impressive list that he's joining.
Athletes doing well their first year turns them into David versus Goliath and David winning. Like I wrote about that in the article, which features Austin Hatfield, by the way. So and it features that list as well. So like that's a piece of this. Now, analysts join the Hall of Fame by picking people that no one else picked and actually putting their stamp on it, which John is doing. I don't mind it at all. Where it just doesn't seem to align logically is just sort of like beyond just you feel good about it, like, which is fine. I just don't get where it lines up with reality. Now, maybe those two talk all the time. Maybe they're out breeding rabbits together. I don't know. John, I don't get on podcasts very often. I write articles. You're on 20 podcasts. We're all promoting our things, John. You're not actually on this podcast, by the way. Anyway, with that, maybe he knows something we all don't. That's possible. But that's just what I'm saying. Like, everybody's going to try to call their shot, and it makes them a hero if they're right. You just gloss over it if you're wrong, but like it makes you a hero if you're right. So good for John. I think if Spin put out all of the rankings that all the media people put out, I think
he used to,
which he did, and I asked for it every single time. By the way,
same.
I want to see how. Well, we'll get towards the top, but I want to see who ranked Jeff Adler low that turned into Ricky winning. But with that, I think I actually probably rank Austin Hatfield higher than both of you. So like I see some of it. I just don't see like the giant leaps that are like Travis Mayer top 5, Austin Hatfield top 10, and some of these things where it's just sort of like, are you kidding? Like, is this like a fun idea, or are you actually sticking behind it? In either sense, I'm for it. I love it. But it's just like, if you're going to sit there and defend it and say that it's going to happen and you guarantee it, I appreciate it, John.
All right. Anyway, I mean, look, Austin Hatfield's been talked about a ton. The rookies have been talked about a ton. By and large, rookies at the CrossFit Games struggle. Austin Hatfield does have some credentials that could suggest that he has a good season this year. And I think if you're looking at a male choice for Rookie of the Year, he's as good a choice as any. But there's 4 or 5 others that I could probably. I
think that'll be closer in the
as well.
Yellow host. Don't want to bring that
up.
Up, but like the host Olivia sort of thing. It's like 10 to like mid-teens isn't bad for a rookie. Like Olivia won.
I mean, look, I think it was pretty clear from Yellow Host and Dave Castro's conversation about that Dave didn't really know what he was doing last year when he made the choice to give Olivia that, and didn't have the historical context of the fact that would be the first time ever that they've chosen one rookie and not given it to the highest placing rookie, male or female. I think that there'll be a little bit more discernment with that this year. But either way, if you're looking at the men individually and you want to pick someone to have Rookie of the Year type of a performance, Hatfield's a great pick. I think I saw some people being questionable about Rosema, but his resume is just as good as Hatfield's. And
that's where I was seeing it. It's like, and we'll see Hatfield on the next page. I don't want to switch that. Let's flip the script to maybe the complete opposite of a rookie, Cole Sager. You have him as 32. PC, you don't have him here, so that just you have him at 20. Okay.
I have him making the first cut based on the workouts.
Okay. Yeah. So now, again, I think this is where some people see a recent ranking of an athlete and maybe they just forget about the last couple of years. But Cole didn't make last year's cut either. So that's where, I sort of get it, but I know you've seen some comments about Cole Sager. Brian, do you want to talk about that one?
I mean, Cole Sager is a tough one to pick. I would say, he's been qualifying for the games forever, and he's had a lot of consistency for a long time with all finishes between 5th and 20th up until last year, where we dropped all the way down to 34th. Does that mean that he's done and he can no longer finish inside the top 20? I don't know. But when you look at his semifinal finishes of the last 4 years, he was first 4 years ago. He was third the year before that, or the year after that, which maybe is like a 5th or a 6th. And then he was 9th, tying with Mertens and getting the last spot in, and he was 8th this year, getting the last spot in. So he's squeaking in barely to the games, and he's doing it in what I just don't see that he has that potential anymore. And even a guy like Travis Mayer, who I still think is maintaining the fitness a little bit better than Cole year round, or at least this year, is going to have a hard time replicating his performances that we're used to seeing from him, just because the field has gotten younger, stronger, better, and deeper.
I have Cole and Travis. I kind of put them, like Brian said, in the same category where, they're veteran athletes. They've been there, they've done that. But I really do like the first cut workouts for those guys. Those are going to favor those type of guys. Like, remember, Cole Sager is probably one of the best. Cole Sager's been training with James Sprague, and you'll see probably in our picks that we have Sprague rated pretty high. Well, if you look at
I think that's great for James. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really good for Cole. And I think those workouts, the first 4 workouts, play in Cole's favor a lot with the running workouts, with Chad, with a lot of these workouts, because that's what Cole's really good at. Remember, Cole Sager in West Coast Classic 2 years ago came from behind and beat James Sprague in the ruck run in Las Vegas. And so we know Cole Sager, he's a very good runner. And to beat someone like James Sprague, now I think Sprague is a better runner now, but he's training with that better runner now. So that's why I have that's why I have Cole making that first cut. I don't agree with him being there 32nd for Brian, but someone has to be there, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's super tough. I mean, even if you just look a couple spots above that, like Luke Parker is a type of a guy that I think is built for the CrossFit Games relative to semifinals. He managed to get in again here on a last day, really strong performance. And I'd love to say that he has a chance to make it into the top 20 this year. But when I start slicing the field down and looking at each of these guys individually, there's just a lot of athletes that I have more faith and confidence in for a variety of different reasons. And so, these guys are all kind of falling into this category that I would say is like they need a perfect run just to make it into that first cut, even in some cases, because the field's so stacked.
Okay. Brian, I got a couple questions here. Maybe I apologize if I've taken some of these from you, Mike, but are you finally cooling down on Samuel Cormier?
Sam Cormier, I mean, I have him here at 21st. Sam Cormier is a guy that I still believe, if he's able to just figure it out, can threaten for, I want to say a top 10, but I think it's more likely to be like a 12th, 13th place finish. That's where I see his top end potential. However, what we've just continually seen from Cormier is something gets in the way. And at this point, yes, I'm putting him at the last spot outside of the bubble, or the final cut. Because I need to see it to believe it. Like he has to prove to me that he's as good as I believe he can be before I rank him up there again. So I have him at 21st. I know that he has the fitness and capacity and strength to make the cut, but he's just failed to do so time after time. And until he does, I'm just leaving him here.
And the other thing is, last time Guy's been at the games, he's finished top 10. This will be, and you have him at 23rd here.
Correct. Yeah, two individual appearances, well, 3 counting 2019 games, 7th and 10th in those 2 years. Basically, I just think that the field is deeper than it was then. I think that the ability to win events, like win 3 events in one CrossFit Games, is not going to happen for him. If he does make it past the first cut, I certainly think he's a great pick to win the clean ladder. I don't see him winning any other events outside of that unless there's another max Olympic lift for some reason. He clearly has that specific specialty. Is really an interesting interview with Dave because he talks about how much he loves training long and he likes just training for Ironman and he likes running long distances and biking and swimming. But just because you like those things doesn't mean you're good at those things. And he's still not good at those things compared to the field. He's going to take some bottom finishes. If you look at, Wadapalooza, he had a decent performance there. And it was 9th. And you look at the guys that were beating him. And all of those guys are at the CrossFit Games. A lot of the guys behind that are at the CrossFit Games. So we do have like a couple of examples from workouts outside of semifinals in South America, which is tough to give an approximation for. And I just don't think he's a top 10 guy anymore. So I think it's going to be tough for him to get through the cut when we already know that he's going to have a couple of bottom 10 and 15 finishes.
Okay, last one, and then we can move on.
Well, I was going to ask the Guy question a little bit differently. Okay. Like, where would you compare the women's field and men's field are different? I understand. I'm not asking that question, but like you have Brooke and Haley and Tia's their own category. So you have Brooke and Haley. They also didn't compete last year. They get a top 10-ish spot, I think, in your rankings. You have Guy, didn't compete last year. Now, all the reasons for they didn't compete are different for each of them, but like you drop him 10 spots-ish from where he was the last time we saw him. So, or more, 13 spots. So,
well, I think if he'd made the games last year, we would have seen a regression as well. That I don't know if it would have been 20th, but maybe it's, but it might have been. Like I just think that last year and especially this year, the overall caliber is better. And we'll get to the top 20 here in a second. But you look at guys like Cornway, Mayer, Mayeros. Yeah, they're guys that I would love to say have top 10 potential. And at some point they did, but I don't think that they do anymore.
Okay. Yeah, I'm ready to move on. There's people on your list, PC, that I think I'm going to ask about, but I'll wait until they
probably.
There's people that Brian hasn't shown yet.
Yeah, I have one last one for Brian. Victor Hoffer. You've seen him in person. You have him making that first cut. Is there something in those work? Do you think he's going to be better at some of the events that we do know? I mean, do you think he's going to have a decent finish in Chad or any of the running events?
Not really. But I do think that there'll be a couple of events in that first 7 that he does have, for him to make it through the first 30 or first 30, top first 10, first cut, he needs to have a top 3 finish, another top 10 finish. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of banking on, some kind of Amanda 45 style workout, inverted medley style workout, something that he can have a home run plus a good finish in order to get into that top 30. And then, I think he'll do fairly well on the clean ladder at the very least. But I don't think he has a chance to make the top 20.
Yeah. I mean, I have him at 30, so 3 spots below. I have him making that cut, but like I said, just kind of barely. So, yeah. And John says, I think you're right. John says this right here. Got to be a gymnastics heavy event somewhere there before the first cut. I think so too. Just so that way you don't have that complaint of athletes saying we weren't given a full test of our skills before that first cut. So
now we lift heavy. It's John's favorite tweet ever.
I think probably the last thing that I should say before we move on from these 20 here is I had Bailey Martin 38th last year. He finished 12th. I think I had Cole Sager 15th. He finished 36th. I think I had Hopper 5th and he finished 31st. That's the nature of the men's competition right now. And we touched on it a little bit on the individual women's side of things, but there's physical capacity, potential, strength, and their performances that we've seen. And then there's what happens in competition. And not all of these guys have the same mental fortitude or experience under the stress of the CrossFit Games to rally from a poor start. In the case of many of these men, how day 1 goes will dictate how the rest of the competition goes. The best athletes out there will be able to put day 1 behind them regardless, show up on day 2 and compete as if day 1 never happened. But those are things that we learn a lot about of the athletes at the games. And just because they did something last year, like we saw from Hopper, doesn't mean that he's going to repeat that this year. He may have changed, and we know he has changed many things in his life. And there's a lot of small factors that can affect how well these athletes perform on game day that have nothing to do with how much they clean or how they placed at a semifinal. Those intangibles are highlighted more and more at the games. And I think that the proximity and conversations that we have, Patrick and I specifically have with some of these athletes and coaches, can help in that regard. But because we talk to some people more than others, we also get information that can be sometimes misleading. and can yield to some pretty dramatic misses. So I fully expect that there are guys that you're looking at on the screen right now that both Patrick and I have in the bottom 20 or maybe even the bottom 10 that will surprise. And there's going to be guys that we look at here in a minute that will be in the bottom half of the field as well.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. 20 through 10 or 11.
Okay,
we didn't want to overwhelm you, Mike, with the top 20 all at once, like we did with the women.
Thank you. I won't just stare at who was it, Gabby? So continuing with that talk track, Brian Bailey Martin, he's one where, as you said, I think you're fairly close with Kiefer Lamy. I think like some of the things I've seen Bailey do, like I don't see a downtrend. Now, that being said, you ranked him 38th and he finished top 20. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. And now you're ranked him 20th. So you gave him 18 more spots than you gave him last year. But it's just interesting to me where I'm seeing just like a trend line up this way. You've flattened it out or not jumped up as much as other people would be on him.
Yeah, I want to say it's kind of an aggressive comment about how low I have Bailey Martin from Talking Head in the Space earlier today. It was suggesting like, wow, you got 10 guys that he beat last year that are going to beat him this year. And that was kind of a misleading number because those 10 guys that he's referring to are Ricky Garrard, Saxon Panchik, Austin Hatfield, Anil Kai, and Luka Jukic, amongst athletes who weren't at the games last year. Yeah. So Bailey didn't have a chance to compete against those guys. And in some cases, like Ricky and Saxon, we know that their last performances at the games were better than Bailey Martin's last performance at the games. Granted, they were in different years. Another one of those people is Justin Medeiros. I don't think that I really need to justify picking Justin Medeiros ahead of Bailey Martin this year. I don't know anybody who has picked Bailey Martin ahead of Justin Medeiros. Sam Quant is another one of them. Overall, I would take Sam Quant on any given competition against Bailey Martin. The guy's got 2 top 4 finishes at the CrossFit Games. He's been there a number of times. He looked solid at semis. He usually, he does have some up and downs at the games, but the guy is a beast. And then you have Sprague, Hopper, and Henrik Kapalainen are the other 3. You see I have them there 13, 14, 15 on my list. I think all 3 of those guys will be better than they were last year, in some cases by a significant margin. I think we already saw some of that at semifinals this year, specifically in the case of Sprague. Kapalainen's been extremely solid. There's been very small little nuances in terms of competition, specifically what happened at the Olympic Total event last year. I think I talked about that on a podcast a couple of weeks ago for him. And I just think that these guys, it's not necessarily that Bailey Martin's gotten any better or worse. I think that was an incredible performance that he had last year. I don't think he's coming into the games with the same vigor that he had last season. I do think he can make the cut, but I don't see him threatening a top 10 this year.
Okay. Yeah, I follow that. Yeah, I mean, you just listed off 4 or 5 guys that just weren't there. I'm excited to see John's list. I don't know how to say it. You list. So back to this. You listed off like 4 or 5 guys there that he just didn't compete against. So if you just slot them higher, it makes sense. He's going to drop from what was he 12th to 20th, 8 spots. Where it doesn't maybe, or where I'm curious is like the fine line between trying to say that an athlete is going to regress versus they had a bad games last year. And therefore, like certain athletes, you're giving an immediate bounce back. With Justin Medeiros is a perfect example. I think he well deserves a bounce back consideration. But other athletes, it's like, okay, no, they're just regressing. And what we saw last year is now going to be truer to form year over year than it is going to be like, okay, Hopper, Medeiros, maybe Quant is a closer example. I think Quant was 15th and you have him 12th. But right around Bailey's area is what I'm looking at. Like these athletes that, okay, he beat them, but now you're going to say they're going to beat him back.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's people that could potentially be critical of this, but when you look at the totality of the rankings that I have, I think it was from Sprague in 13th down to maybe Travis Mayer or Guy Mayeros that are like 22, 23. That group of 10 guys, I see a lot of, I don't see much between them. I think it's going to come down to small margins of execution, to some timing things, to decisions that they make at critical moments in the competition. And this
even to events that haven't been announced. Right?
Order of events can matter because we're talking about the cut line right there.
Right.
These are all guys that I think will make it past the first cut without issue, but it's going to be a battle to get into that second cut. And, I see stuff like comments like this. Anil Akai is tough. Why are you so high on him? Quant thrives under Dave's program. I'll put him 12th under BKG and Sprague. These little comments, like you can take every one of these guys and make a small case for them doing very, very well.
Thank you, Kevin.
In the case of Anil Akai, I suppose, Anil is a good friend of mine. I've seen him compete a ton of people here. V says Anil is Brian's heart pick. We will allow those. Plus, we like him because he's dreaming.
Well, I mean, it's great that John's here. The heart picks right next to each other, more or less. And you listed Austin higher. So, like, after the last page of discussion around Austin Hatfield, it doesn't be like, oh, well, Brian's best friend on the list is one spot lower. It's just sort of like,
Well, and look, and on Anil Akai, quite frankly, I've mentioned it before that I think of the offseason competitions that Dubai is a better predictor for the games than Rogue or Wadapalooza are, which clearly have some biases in certain directions. There are athletes that transcend that. Fellner's going to do good of all of them, Ricky, Roman, Adler, etc. But if you look at the rest of the list, and Anil Akai's finished 5th and 6th the last 2 years in Dubai. He's had some great performances there. He's had some challenging for those guys. I know he's been training with Ricky. I've talked to him while he's been training with Ricky, and it's comparable. It's probably comparable for like J.O., who spent some time with Cole Sager and James Sprague, and you're watching them compete up there, and they look pretty similar on a lot of events. But you know that when you put them into the game setting, a 10-second win for Ricky is probably going to be more than one spot on the leaderboard. There's going to be some discrepancy there. So I think Anil would say the same. Like, he's getting great push from Ricky. He's getting great experience there. He may be challenging him on some stuff, but there's still a huge gap between Anil Akai and Ricky Garrard. I do think that Anil has a skill set that lends itself well to the CrossFit Games, an experience in competitions outside of the games that he can lean on a little bit. The training culture team, the coaches that are there have coached teams and individuals at the games in the past. So it's not like they're coming in, they're rookies, but they have a good support system around them. Luka Jukic has a similar skill set to Anil, and I've heard some, phenomenal things about his preparation coming into here. I would not fault anybody from picking Anil or Luka to miss the cut. And there was one comment in the Instagram about just me being preferential to the European athletes. And if you want to say that, that's totally fine. Obviously, I spend a ton of time over there. And so, I'm giving a little bit of the benefit of doubt here to Anil and Luka because I believe that they're good enough to make the cut, and I want to have confidence that they're going to execute well enough to do it too.
We need to see what color Brian's passport is.
Jeez.
Is it the Europeans or brown passports?
At least dual citizenship.
Okay.
So
it's blue.
So Luka's a great example too. 29th in 2021, hasn't made it back since. You're jumping him up 10 spots from where he was against a likely tougher field.
Yeah, so he puts himself on the line and competes more than anyone. He backed off of that a little bit prior to the semifinals because this has been his goal, to get back to the CrossFit Games, to prove to himself that he could do it in a live competition setting. The only other year that he qualified in an online format. I think it was a German throwdown. And he had a pretty good performance at semifinals, bar one event. Event number 2, he took 34th place. And the front squats really crushed him there. He does have some weaknesses relative to the field that will be exposed at the games, but he also has some strengths. He's a great endurance athlete. I think he's going to get off to a good start and kind of fade as the weekend goes on relative to the overall leaderboard. But yeah, I know that he has enough experience to draw on that if things go bad, he can recover from that. He's a very savvy, aware competitor. And so I think that those little details can make a difference when you're battling a few other people for the cut line. And then I do think that he'll be exposed in the back half of the competition. If he makes it to Sunday, I don't think he'll have a great Sunday, and he'll finish towards the bottom of the top 20.
So it's an interesting, because I've been following all this camp stuff. So, but Lazar and Lucas stayed together, I believe, in Serbia, right? And they trained together the whole time versus where a lot of other athletes were.
They did not do the same training.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were training in the same location, but not doing the same training.
They'll share some pieces here and there. If they feel like they need to get another piece in or another aspect of them, they'll share some pieces here and there, but not exclusively. They kind of, yeah.
Well, because you gave an example of like Cole Sager and James, and maybe they're like actually a perfect example because similarly, I think they're sharing some pieces, but they're not.
Mhm.
Obviously, James is with Brute, so that's where I would be curious: is how much does it lift up the other athlete, and then what do you consider that when you're doing some of these of like who they are competing against day in and day out, like in Olakai, going over to underdogs and training with them for the
I
last
don't,
couple weeks, or like
I
what does
don't,
that look like?
I don't think it's really so much the training. I think it's more just having that presence there. Like
Mm.
Lazar knowing that Luca's in the garage busting his ass to beat his brother, it motivates Lazar. If you know anything about those guys are very, they're driven by things that motivate them. Just something as simple as our picks will be a source of motivation for them. And I think Luca's the
Yeah.
same way. And I think having Luca, they're close in that way. Where Luca, when he kind of went to the Middle East and kind of was out there by himself, going through all these competitions, I think he's found between Kiefer and them being back home and training with his brother or a lot, I think it's made him a lot better athlete than he's ever been.
And Brian, you touched on it, but for people that don't know, what has Luca been doing basically weekend and weekend out like for the last 3 years? We last
Luka
saw
Jukic.
the games
Yeah.
in 2021, but you know a bit more of like he wasn't just sitting on his hands this whole time. He was competing basically every event
yeah,
or what.
he has taken the term being a professional competitive CrossFitter to a realm that very few athletes have. Even this upcoming off season, I can't keep track of the number of competitions that he's already signed up for in the off season. He's going to be doing Turku Tuomiopäivä in Finland, and then the next week Belgrade Games. He also I can't remember. There's 2 or 3 others that he's announced, but he basically has tailored his entire life in the off season towards being able to make money through competition that is, considered professional athlete. Like all of his income is coming in through that. He does have some sponsors and support, of course, in getting to those things and whatever. But he's competing all throughout the Middle East in the winter and all throughout Europe in the fall. And then he will dial it in to try to make the semis a priority, meaning he won't compete for maybe 6 to 8 weeks before that. And then go, if he's good enough that year to go to the games. I think he's actually been good enough every year to be competing at the CrossFit Games. He came up 2 overhead squats short at Lowlands, and he was too sick to compete last year, basically. Yeah. So we've seen him make it online, miss it by a rep or 2, be sick, and now make it with, I would say, conviction, having 4 out of 6 at least really strong events in a tough European semi. So he's not a rookie. It's obviously his second year, but he's not a guy that's coming in with a lacking amount of experience. He's working with Kiefer, and I feel like through talking to both of them, that's been a positive change for him in the past 6 months or so. They both feel really good about where he's at. Now, the one thing about the Jukic brothers that I would say is a knock against them is that they both have chosen to come over to the States late compared to most of the international athletes, having just gotten here the last couple of days. So if they can acclimate well enough, and Lazar's competed in the States a bunch of times. So, I'm sure he's making that decision with a good understanding of it. Luke has been much less experienced over here, but he travels a lot. So as long as they're able to get their feet under them for the competition, I think you're going to see the best versions of both of them that we've ever seen.
BKG, 11th and 16th. This is one of the bigger gaps I see on the page.
Yeah, not in red for some reason. PC, why don't you talk about BKG being in 16, which would be his lowest finish since his rookie season back in 2014. And 18. At the same time, Luke Parker, who you have 16 spots higher than me, placing 14th overall, beating guys like Quant, BKG, Maieros, Cormier, etc.
Put it to him.
I knew I was waiting for you guys to say something about Luke. So Luke, I just like the workouts for him that we know. And I just think he's kind of like, he's not putting so much out there than he used to do before. Like if you look at what he did last year, he's putting all his workouts out there. He's like, was really putting himself out there. And this year, him being a new father, being an expected father, and he's kind of like taking a step back. And I think there's just a level of confidence in just talking with Luke and talking to people that know Luke, that this is a different Luke from last year. And I think that was what he was, if you when in the interviews talked, he was just kind of over. He was just there's a lot going on at the games, and yes, I think Luke is probably one of the better runners in the field, and I also think he's one of the better swimmers too. So that event one, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a top 10 finish out of him, if not a top 5. And then just some of those other workouts. He's a fast twitch, and he's also a long distance runner. I mean, I really like him. He's my guy that I think is going to make that big jump. We see that every year where there's one athlete, as a rookie, and they make a big jump the second year. And I think Luke's that guy because of who he is. He's a more mature athlete than some of these other athletes. I mean, he's been around a little bit longer. He's a family man. He's got the mayhem machine behind him.
I don't know if he's been around that much longer than these guys, dude. Quant, rookie in 2016, BKG, sure. Rookie in 2014. Mayeros competing as a teenager in the sport.
Well, I think what we're seeing is like kind of a passing of a torch. Like, he's older, but newer to the game. In terms of age, he's older, but he's newer to CrossFit. And he's one of those guys who, he puts a goal down, he accomplishes it. And I just really like him right now.
He does have a skill set. He does have a skill set that on paper looks good for the games. He does have a confidence. If you talk to him after semifinals, even though he took the last spot, he was never worried about making it. He had full belief in his abilities to execute on the final day, and he did it. I think John's basically says that he would middle our pick of him. I think I had him 30. You have him 14. So maybe mid to low 20s, probably more likely. But we'll see. Luke Parker's he's definitely an interesting case study.
He might have a Scotty Scheffler situation.
When you have these situations with athletes,
wasn't that the? Sorry, I was gonna say that Luke. I think it was Scotty Scheffler, right? He was at the Masters, and his wife was like about to go into labor at any moment, and we were. Yeah,
when you have like considerable life variables that are taking place surrounding big competitions, it can be a beneficial or a negative, and it's really hard to say. I think that in the case of Luke Parker, that he's pretty good at being present with wherever he is, whether he's, at church, he's focused on church. He's not thinking about training. If he's with his family, he's focused on family. If he takes a vacation, he's good at taking a vacation and setting that aside. And when it's time to train or compete, he's really good at dialing that in too. So I think Luke will manage all those variables well. I just don't know if he's good enough against this field to do much better than he did last year.
So Luke took a bullet for BKG here, who we skipped past when I asked him about.
So BKG, again, I think all these athletes, they're just really close in terms of, and I kind of now looking at it, it's like, and then knowing what I know about BKG and how healthy he is coming in, I kind of regret putting him this low. I probably would move him probably more in that 13 to 11 realm, but then it'd be hard for me to difficult. Maybe I would have swapped out him and Jason Hopper in retrospect. But then but does that mean that Jason's not training any harder? I think Jason's had a great training season so far. And I mean, the really unknown is Samuel Kwon, out of all of this.
And him and Sam and Hopper and
let me just add this about BKG, because BKG is a tough one to study. He took 11th last year, and everyone knew that he was kind of dealing with the back injury, so he's limited in a few regards. The year before that, he took 9th, and he said that he felt as fit as he'd ever felt coming into the games, and he was pretty pissed, but with a 9th place finish that year. And I think that whether he's at his best or his worst against the field now, he's just no longer a top 6-7 guy at the games. 8th place is probably the best I think he can do. 15th, I think, is possible. And I think somewhere in that range is likely, which is why I have him here at 11th, more or less replicating what his last couple of years finish would have been at the CrossFit Games.
Man, a shot at Cole Sager and Travis Mayer in the same comparison. Where I was thinking of going is the bounce back folks, but they bounce back sort of not completely. Like, I think again, we're going to get to Justin where we last saw him, and then where we think we're going to see him again. But like, they jump back more to the middle, and then they might even take a jump the next year after this, where it's like, okay, they were 30th or they were this odd placing before. You're going to bounce them back to, in Hopper's case, we can talk about it now, 13th, versus saying like, okay, he's just going to be a 30th again, or a wait and see type athlete where it's like, hey, they burned me, I'm going to wait and see before I give them. respect on a ranking again, or an athlete where it's just like, it was an off year, we're just going to ignore it. I'm just going to give him top 10 immediately again, even though the last time we saw him in this competition, he was 20th or worse. So Hopper, I think, is the one that gets the most on this, just because he has been so up and down the leaderboard. You're bouncing him back to 13th and 14th here. What is that? What do you think on Hopper not making the top 10? He did it 2 years ago. He didn't do it last year.
Yeah, and Jason Isaacs a while ago, please explain Hopper placing. I would love to hear your guys' reasoning. If you are paying attention to what's going on with anything that JR is doing, and he's obviously had Jason training at CrossFit Crash majority of the year, there's certain things that he has said about Jason. Specifically, I think someone put it in the comments somewhere about his upper body gymnastics pulling having improved, and that he's kind of shoring up some holes that were exposed last year at the CrossFit Games, even holes that may have been exposed in competitions previously to that. And it's not like he's like that performance at the Games stands alone. He went back to Rogue and he took 7th place there for the 3rd year in a row. He's clearly strong. He's clearly powerful. He's clearly fit. And look at his semifinals performance, though. He's almost 100 points behind the top 3 guys. So he's not in the caliber of athlete and this is a workout that a competition that many people in the comments today have called a big man's competition. Now, he did take a couple gambles that didn't pay off. I really liked those gambles. If those do pay off, maybe it's 60 to 70 points. But if you multiply the competition by 2, now you're talking about being 150 points behind guys like an Adler and a Krennikov, and 150 points behind him at the Games level can even be kind of blown up a little bit depending on how many people end up middling there. It's just not good enough to compete for those top 5, 6 spots. I do think he has a chance at the top 10. I just see him slightly on the outside this year.
Okay. And this is an interesting question. Do you have a tiers? Because you just mentioned you could see him making the top 10, but you ranked him 14th. When it came to the teams yesterday, I think we showed it even, like you had a tier list. And I know in the women's case, there's some like noticeable tiers where Tia's up here and then it's Laura and then it's so on. When it comes to these athletes, I knew you did. When it comes to these athletes, like where do you think the tier starts and ends, and where do you think the gap really is?
Give me a second and I'll show you exactly that. I didn't prepare that one, but I will. PC. We haven't talked while I'm pulling this up here, PC. We haven't talked about Sprague yet, but what was your rationale for having him out flirting with the top 10 pick there?
Oh, you're on mute.
There you are.
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. I just like what James has done. We've seen a lot of James, and I think we saw a lot of what he was capable of doing at West Coast. Yes, there are running workouts. We know he is the best, if not one of the best runners in this field. So he's going to do really good in those first 7 workouts. He's a long, lengthy guy. He'll do really good on Chad. I also like the idea of him and Cole, and in some instances, Katrin, jumping on the training sessions. I really enjoy that. And I just think that James has made that big jump that we'd like to see. And I think he has the right attitude about it too. All right, what do you got here?
These are alphabetical by category. I know the blue is not great to see, but basically I think that Adler, Gerard, and Roman are the guys that can win. Pepper, Medeiros, Jukic, and Vellner are the guys that can podium. Oh, yeah. The next group up behind that, BKG, Fikowski, Crouch, Hosta, and Quant. A big group there for the cut line battle. Needs a perfect run. Are guys that, if everything lines up perfectly, I can see them making the cut, but I think it's less likely. First cut is the deepest, means those are the guys that need to make it through the first cut to have a successful, and then bottom battle guys that I think are basically competing to not finish last at the game. So it's kind of a pyramid style with that big group in the middle that I talked about, but here's the visual for what you were asking about, Mike.
Okay. Yeah. I think that helps a lot, because where we get lost, and not to go back to the previous conversation on Hatfield or any specific athlete, but I think where this field this year with the men, where somebody could say like any of these athletes could make the top 10 if it works out this way. They could easily be in the mid 20s though if it goes the other way. Like that's where I was like trying to mentally sort of stack this up, is to say, okay, but I think that falls into chunks where it's like, no, Dallin through, well, again, you said this is alphabetical, but like the Dallin category, the BKG category, they're going to be a step above than the next the cut line battle sort of group, where it's okay. Yeah, they could. I'm sure any one of these could fall a stack one way or the other too, right? Like you wouldn't be too surprised if you see Hopper jump into that next up category, or somebody like that, or Guy if he's really much different than the last time we saw him, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, of course. And like I said, there's probably going to be a guy that's at first cut deepest that ends up finishing 16th overall. You know, there's just that's the way we have the competition for. But when I was putting it down on paper, this is where I felt kind of confident grouping each of these guys, and what each kind of grouping meant to be is what I, kind of labeled them at there. So next up, that means opportunity. If those guys, especially the guys in green there, have a poor weekend, that means guys like Brent Fikowski, Yellow Host, Jay Crouch may have that, Sam Quant may have that perfect run that gets them, right near the podium spot. But all things equal, I would take the guys in green over the guys next to them, just going blindly into a competition.
That's good.
This is a fair statement. I think Justin looks more back and can win depending on the programming. I did consider just bumping Justin into the can win category, but based on the last 2 years, I just think that Adler, Roman, and Ricky have shown to be this top class of athlete. And even though Medeiros is certainly has shown that he has the capacity to win, I need to see it again at the biggest stage against those guys before I put him back in that group. Plus, I didn't want to have 4 over there and 3 in the one next to it. Just didn't look good.
Should we go ahead and transition to the top 10 then?
Yes, I think so, but I want to show a couple things before we do that. Let me just pull them up here. Did this on the women's side as well. It's just to give a little bit of context. Let's look at first the top 10 athletes from the last 3 seasons, and then 2018 is there on the left. And unlike the women's field here, what you're going to see is there's not a lot of red from 2021, 22, 23. 2 of those red marks are Jonakowski. One is Chandler Smith, who's gone on a team. One is Scott Panchik, who's basically retired. One's Noah Olson, and the other is Alex Vino. So a majority of the men who have been in the top 10 over the last 3 seasons are still coming back this year. And if they're in blue, which is Vellner, BKG, and Lazar, that means they've been, this is top 11, in the top 11 each of the last 3 seasons. If they're in green, that means they've done it at least twice. And if they're in yellow, that means they've done it once. But when you look at the guys that have done it once, and there's names like Ricky Garrard, Dallin Pepper, Sam Quant, Jason Hopper, Jay Crouch, and Yellow Hoste, those are a pretty strong group of men that have only been able to do it one time out of the last 3 years. That's how hard it is to make the top 10 at the CrossFit Games. Most of these guys you're going to see them showing up in our top 10, but I want to draw your attention to the bottom 2 things there in purple. Last year at the Games, from 4th to 11th was 71 total points. From the year prior, 6th to 10th, 61 total points. And to help contextualize what that can potentially mean in terms of competition, let me pull this one up for you guys. This is last year's 6th through 11th place finishers. I took Roman and Brent out of it because they were just a little bit ahead, but 6th through 11th. And this is their final day points. So the average number of points that these guys earned out of 300 on the last day was 185. Look at Jonakowski and Dallin Pepper, 270 and 250 points on the last day. Just being able to show up on the final day of competition at the CrossFit Games, you need to be strong enough. You need to be fit enough. Everyone was talking about Pepper's last day. I haven't heard anyone talk about what Jonakowski did. 2nd, 3rd, and 4th on the last day of competition last year. And these guys that have that experience, that have that confidence, that have the understanding of what it takes to execute at the highest level on the final day, those are the guys that can make this surge. And I mean, you're talking about 70 total points separating those 7 positions on the leaderboard. And you're talking about 155 points separating what Chandler Smith was able to amass and Koski, which is double that on one day of competition.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the Pat interview with Dave, is where like Pat said, like, well, if you did the swim last sort of thing, he would have a bad finish versus having a bad start. And I think of somebody like Koski, where we usually just like pigeonhole him a little bit into, well, he's the best swimmer, he wins event 1, and then what do you see with him after that? So like this is a amazing chart here of just showing like, no, he started strong and finished strong. He didn't hit the podium or anything like that, somewhere in the middle. But yeah, this is cool.
So hopefully those things just help put into context 2 things. 1, it's really hard to make the top 10. Two, the margins, once you get past those top 3 or 4 spots, are extremely, extremely tight. And so if we have somebody ranked 10th and you're like, no, that person can finish 5th, it's like, yeah, they definitely can finish 5th. But when we break it down and we're going to kind of within that group of athletes, we're going to say, we're going to give the preference to this athlete over this one because of either experience, what we know about them based on their preparation and lead into this. Or sometimes we feel really similar and we just have to make a pick one way or the other. All right, PC, let's see the top 10. Everyone can get excited here in a second.
Oh, he's talking. You're on mute.
Oh yeah, you're muted, Patrick.
So we do have the same athletes in the top 10. Order's a little bit.
All right, we'll see you guys
But
later.
Again, that shows you how close that top 10 is.
Yeah. Whoa. You hate Patrick Vellner, Pat. Your own namesake.
I want to tell you guys this. So 2 years ago, before the CrossFit Games, I had this idea with Chase Ingram, who was doing some CrossFit podcasts at the time. And I basically came up with some either or scenarios or some kind of like challenging questions. And I wanted to do a podcast leading into the games and we did it with Nicole Christensen and Adrian Conway. Because I was on the podcast and some people at CrossFit didn't want that to air, it never aired. But on that show, one of those two people, I think it was Nicole Christensen, said, I don't think that both Vellner and Fikowski will finish in the top 10 this year at the games. And I thought it was a crazy statement to make. And lo and behold, Vellner went on, or Fikowski went on to finish, was it 16th that year? And that prediction ended up coming true. So we're going to give Patrick the same benefit of the doubt here and the opportunity to tell us why he thinks Pat Vellner barely will make it into the top 10.
Look at it. You say barely. I said that it should be more prevalent that there's going to be like 20-point difference between 5 and 10. So
70 or 60 is what it's been the last 2 years. 20 points is what PC sees separating these 5 guys.
Don't quote me on that. Do not quote me on that. Yeah, sorry, T-Bird. But yeah, I just think it's one of those things where it's just how things fell. Obviously, it's not the first 7. The workouts we know aren't going to be the greatest for Patrick. He's not the strongest runner or swimmer, and that's the first workout we have. And then I don't, when it comes to the sprint and the 1600 meter, probably not do very well. He's already said his own. He's not a big fan of Chad. I don't think many people are a big fan of Chad, but I don't think he'll be, maybe best case scenario is top 15 finish in Chad for Vellner. It's, overall, I just don't like how some of these workouts. So he's going to be digging himself out of a hole, which we're used to seeing. But we're used to seeing Vellner dig himself out of a hole after 1 or 2 events. But when you start adding multiple events, he has the home run capability. He will have a couple, maybe 1-2 event wins, but he'll have a bunch of top 5s. But I just think that hole's going to be a little too deep for him to crack into that top, 4, top 3.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
and I do hope he proves me wrong.
And okay. And where I would see a lot of people rank the Canadian brothers here, Pat and Brent, is usually it's in Brian's order. Like if you're going to see somebody take a step back or regress, or I don't even know in Brent's case if that's really a regression so much, but like where then do you then see how much stock are you putting in the first event here? And now it's only 1 of 4 that we've heard about so far, but it feels like then you're putting a lot in Brent
for guys
home run on the first event.
Yeah, for guys at this stage of the leaderboard, the events that are announced don't matter. I mean, they obviously, because the events matter for the people that are going to be threatening to miss the cut. These guys are going to have the opportunity to take the full test if they don't get injured. And therefore, we have to have faith in the fact that Dave Castro will program a complete test of fitness across 4 days of competition. Yeah. Every time that Bill and Chase or anyone else has evaluated the CrossFit Games, when you take stop gaps throughout the week, we know that sometimes the programming can be lopsided. But when we look at the totality of the test, even in 2019 with the 12 total tests that they have, it was a good test of fitness across the entire competition. So these guys are going to have a chance to show their capacity on everything from triple unders, John, to heavy lifting, to long workouts, short workouts, back-to-back workouts, small amounts of recovery, early mornings, late nights, going long, and everything in between. And at the end of the day, basically, these are results of what I think are truly, based on the definition of CrossFit. If you listen to everything that Dave's talked about, he's going back to the roots. These are, in order, the guys that I think are the fittest men on earth. Okay.
Wow.
Let's I want
to tell me, because they're not that much different. Like, it really is just Brett and Pat, as far as what sticks out to me the most. But like, and then everything else can be the semantics of maybe 5 points here, 20 points there, sort of stuff. But
well, let me talk about Fikowski real quick, because Fikowski took 4th place at the games last year, and now you're down in 8th place. Fikowski jersey, that's right. And slot in Ricky there. That bumps him down to 5th. You slot in Justin having a bounce back year. I mean, I've seen people picking him to win Podium for sure. He beat him at semifinals. Like, Justin looks like he's back and he's a formidable force. So I don't think that it's that crazy to slide Fikowski from 4 to 6. Then you look at the next 2 people. Well, Dallin Pepper was only, I think it was 20 points behind him last year at the games. No, 3 points behind him last year at the games, 23 points behind Roman. And Dallin had a really good semifinal. I know there are people that think that Dallin has the potential to make the podium this year based on everything about his history, his trajectory, and his performance at semis, beating Roman and finishing 3 points behind Jeff. I do think that over the course of the entire weekend that he'll be more exposed. I saw some people put some comments about like maybe not doing great on the running events. He's clearly gotten better as a runner, but when running is still a weakness relative to many of the top guys in the sport, and we know that it's going to be tested at least 2 or 3 times, that does factor in a little bit more, heavily than a semifinal. I don't think Dallin Pepper's 5th place finish was a mistake last year, but I also think that was like right at the top end of what he could do. And I think that the field is a little bit stronger this year than it was last year. So a 7th place finish is not necessarily saying that he's gotten worse, but I do think that he might have taken that small step past Fikowski. And then there was one comment about Lazar Jukic. Ironically fit. Brian's picks are legit. Not sure about the Jukic one, though. He actually messaged me this morning as well. He goes, "Oh, you're giving me more credit this year than most years." Clearly, I know Lazar well. I clearly see him compete a lot. Don't forget that he took that crash on the bike workout last year. And if he didn't crash on that bike workout, he would have finished 6th at the CrossFit Games, maybe 7th. But it would have been 2 spots better. It would have been his best finish at the games. He's definitely the strongest version of himself that he's ever been. He peaked less for semifinals this year than he's ever done before. He shifted away from Mayhem because he wanted a coach that was going to be completely focused on him. He went back to his original coach. He says he feels as good as he ever has coming in. I already mentioned that he's showing up late to the States relative to some other athletes, which could be a knock against him. But I have to have the confidence that as a professional who's done this a bunch of times, he knows what works for him. I think that we're going to see the best version of Lazar Jukic, and I think that he can challenge some of these guys. I mean, he's had good performances in the offseason. Yes, he's always a little bit behind the guys like Ricky and Roman, but like I said, those guys were 100 points clear of the field 2 years ago. I still think they're going to be 50 points. The top 3 guys are going to be 50 points clear of the field. And Lazar is going to very much be in that battle with, Vellner, Pepper, Fikowski, Hosta, etc. for these middle spots. I think he's going to walk away with his best ever finish this year.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. Yeah, for sure. When it comes to that, how much do you say the same thing about Justin then? Same bike accident, same.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to say if that bike accident
what that trajectory was after that. Yeah, of course. But you're both listing in Justin as 4th. You're not giving him the podium though, and you're obviously giving credit. Besides flip-flopping Ricky and Roman, like, you're giving credit to that tier, that podium tier. I guess this goes back to my tier list. Like, everybody on this page, you wouldn't be that surprised if they were on the podium, or?
No, I would be surprised if The bottom 3 guys on this list got on the podium.
Okay, you're bottom 3. Okay,
yeah, 8, 9, 10. I would not be surprised if Justin Medeiros is on the podium. I was tempted to pick him to put him on the podium. I kind of, if I was, even though I had those classes I show you, I would favor he and Vellner over Pepper and Jukic, and therefore the rankings reflect that.
When it comes to then the podium, because I think that's what everybody's staring at here. Roman got hurt on muscle up log, then got 2 zeros. No one knows what he would have done in those 2 events had he had 2 working ankles or feet. So with that, though, he was only 36 points behind Pat. Ricky's back. Why do you think he couldn't be back right into first, second category, Brian? Because
he absolutely can. Let's see here. Ryan Talbot. I don't think Jeff repeats. He needed a down Justin, no Ricky, an injured Roman to do it last year. I think he is a one and done champion, similarly to Ben Smith. V. It seems like people are not behind Adler, like in general. What do you think is contributing to this? Roman's injury, likability, Ricky coming back, could be something else. So a couple comments that are very much in line with what you're asking there. And then finally, everyone is overhyped on Ricky, thinking he'll ace everything. It is true that the CrossFit Games on paper looked incredibly good for Ricky last year. And he has looked really good in competition throughout, really since Dubai. Dubai minus the obstacle course was amazing. Wadapalooza, he did very well. Semifinals, he was great.
He looked good at Rogue too, considering that Rogue is typically something that he wouldn't do well, and he did a lot better than he expected.
Yeah, and I think that, he's going to insert himself right back into the battle with these top guys like it was a couple years ago. That year it was Justin and Ricky and Roman, and then last year it was Jeff and Roman. Clearly, Roman belongs in that group. I think Ricky belongs in that group. I do think Jeff is getting underrated. The advantage that Jeff Adler has over almost everyone that I've ever seen compete in CrossFit is just consistency in his life. The guy has lived in the same place with the same partner, coaching at the same gym, eating the same food, sleeping the same way, doing the same style of programming for a decade. He can, when you have that level of consistency of checking every box every day over and over and over and over again, that is the CrossFit methodology. That is low trajectory to distant horizon. That's the thing that makes someone hard to kill and hard to beat in competition. When he came to the semifinals this year, he was very well aware. And if you listen to his interviews that he's done since then, he mentions these things subtly and with nuance about the fact that those workouts, he knew it would be tough to beat Roman. He knew that Jeff would be down would be a threat at those workouts and in that competition. He still found a way to beat them. I know that there's people that think that if Roman competed in those last 2 workouts, they would have beat him. And I know that there's no way that we'll ever know. We know that Roman would have finished first or second at the games last year. He's definitely a podium athlete. The margins between these 3 guys and maybe Justin are so small and so hard to discern, but I like the consistency, the mental fortitude, the preparation, the ability to hone in on specific things and refine. And then Adler has consistently been able to not just do those in training, but replicate them on the competition floor. I don't have a ton of confidence that he's going to repeat this year, but I have enough confidence in him to be in the fight that I'm going to pick him until Ricky or Roman shows that they can beat him on the big stage.
Yeah, and there's a few pieces there you touched on it, and I don't get it. Like, I don't get how more people aren't championing Jeff Adler. Like, and it reminded me. Well, I'll give you I'll let you say it here, PC. You were on Pedro's podcast or the debate show that he has, and I think you said that Jeff Adler was your underdog athlete or something like that. Am I right? Or am I just dreaming this?
No,
you said Jeff Adler was underrated.
I did.
And you had to
the most underrated.
Yeah,
the most underrated. Yeah,
it's like crazy to. Yeah, go ahead, say it.
And I defended that pick, and I think a lot of people started agreeing with me because you're part of the media poll. Since the guy had in the media poll by the analysts, by the professionals, we hadn't put him at number 1 up until last month's poll, and even this month's poll, he's dropped down to 2. And this is a week after he won the games when we came out that media poll. He wasn't number 1, and this is after he won the games.
And here's where I don't get it in 2 ways, actually, and a little bit of a soapbox here. Like, there's so much that like he's doing. If you have an athlete that literally talks about the nutrition and the blocks, like go back to your L1.
Old school. Yeah, old school.
The part of the test that everyone did poorly on was those effing blocks and trying to figure out like what was carbs and what was like protein and what was fat and all of that. He just like throws out there to Dave that he's been doing blocks for years. And we see all these other athletes get champion and they're winning and they're doing well and they're eating like shit. Like, and so like, I don't know how, and I see it when I talk to Carolyn too. It's like, they are Mr. and Mrs. CrossFit, like, like inside and out, like everything they're doing is CrossFit. And somehow everybody is just like, oh no, give it to Roman, give it to Ricky, give it to Justin, give it to like all these people. And it's just like, I don't think you understand. He is like CrossFit. Like everything he does, as you said, for a decade is like pure CrossFit. And we're seeing it. And I think it's getting like undervalued, stated.
You know who's undervaluing it? CrossFit.
Like, how is that blocks clip not like the one that they went with versus like nutrition's the base. The winner, the fittest on earth is literally doing our nutrition program that no one seemingly does. Like, it was just baffling to me that it was like, well, why are we not hearing more about this? I'll put something out since I can do that.
Yeah, but it's hilarious because yes, I know it's a small team. CrossFit has a small media team, but just send someone there for a weekend, and that's your poster child for CrossFit. Everything about it. That's your champion. He's
the guy was on the equipment team, man.
Exactly.
And he went for the equipment team. I mean, I saw that because CrossFit. I'll give him the credit there. I didn't know that otherwise. But
well, that was because Jeff posted it and CrossFit went with it. Jeff posted it. Caroline and Jeff posted it first.
But I do think that, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just a couple of contrarian comments here. Braden, what is in between Ricky's ears will always be a weakness for him. That's why Jeff will win. John Young, I've been on the Ricky train since Rogue. Just for the record, I have Jeff second. It's not like I don't think he's great. You've got Ricky in the 3 spot there, PC. Do you think that Ricky is limited by his mental capacity and that will prevent him from winning? Or even though you have him third, do you think he has what it takes mentally and physically to potentially get it done this year?
I don't question his mentality at all. I mean, he becomes, he becomes some absent-minded sometimes in certain things, but I think that's just his competitive nature. Like he's, and that's what I love about him. I don't think his mental game or his forgetfulness or him going rogue, in a workout and not following the script. I don't think that hurts him at all. It might, but I don't think it does because I think, he's going to realize how important having Justin Kotler and following the script when he's there means so much to him. And if it doesn't, Ricky's a fighter. We've seen Ricky fight at Wodapalooza. We saw him fight at Dubai. The guy's a fighter. I mean, he wouldn't be in this position because look at all the other athletes. Any other athlete would have quit everything that he's been through. He keeps on fighting. He knows CrossFit. I just think Roman is just more disciplined and probably more well-rounded than Ricky is. But they're all so good. And like I said, I'll throw Justin there too. Maybe Justin's lacking and maybe he's not as good in the monostructural than Jeff, Roman, and Ricky are, but he's not that far behind because obviously he's a student of that, the aerobic capacity. He's a graduate of that academy as well. So
2 guys on this top 10 list that we haven't really talked about yet are Yellow Hosta and Jay Crouch. We have them in similar spots there. If I told you that one of these 2 guys, Patrick, was going to finish in the top 5, which one would you believe it more about?
God, that's a good one. I'm probably just gonna have to go with Hosta. I don't like with Hosta. I know he can win events. If I had to say Jay Crouch, what stands out to you about Jay Crouch?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that question, the thing that stands out about Jay Crouch is that he's beaten him the last 2 times they competed against each other at the games last year by a few spots, and at Rogue by a few spots. Jay Crouch was, I think I want to mention these 2 guys because I was trying to find any way to put these guys higher on this list, and I just couldn't. I couldn't. Like, dropping Fikowski down to 8th already didn't feel good, and I've taken some heat for that. But I mean, it's not impossible that he finishes there. And I just didn't have enough confidence yet in Hosta and Crouch to put him above some of these guys who've been consistently this good year after year for the last couple of years, at least for the last 8 years in some cases. But they're both incredible. Jay Crouch has convinced me that he's a top 10 guy in the world based on what he's did in the last season. Obviously, he's been really good at semifinals for many years now. He's now shown that he can do it at the games. He's shown that he can do it at Rogue, which on paper shouldn't be an amazing place for him to necessarily compete well and have a top 10 finish. He was only 5 points behind Pepper and Hopper there. So he's not far off the step. And then you have Yellow Hosta. I don't know what to think about this guy in terms of what his ceiling is. He surprised me at semifinals with some of the performances, especially in the back third of workouts where he was doing things that I remember watching Justin Medeiros do in 2021 and Pat Vellner do in 2016 at the games. So I feel like there's evidence for both of these guys to be ranked higher on the leaderboard, but it's kind of one of those things like if you want to unseat some of these guys from that graphic that we showed earlier with all those blue and green names up there in the top, like it's similar to Cornwall. Like, it's not that I don't believe they can do it. I need to see it before my picks reflect it.
Yeah, Jay's very similar to like Justin, where we kind of know what Justin's good at when it comes to him being on his hands. But Jay's not going to win events, but he's going to finish top 5 in a lot of events. Kind of similar to what Justin does. But to finish top 5, or top 10 with this group, you're going to put yourself in a good position. And yeah,
and look, through the first round of cuts, just so in case people are like, "What?" Jay had finishes of 3rd, 10th, 4th, and 8th. So 4 out of 6 top 10 finishes. The next series of events, 6, 10, 8, and 6 on the back half of the competition. So he's having 8 out of 12 events where he's finishing inside the top 10. His bad finishes are 20th, 22nd, and 22nd. Like, it was a phenomenal CrossFit Games for Jay Crouch. It yielded 8th place.
Yeah,
he has to have that good of a performance again.
Yeah, go ahead. Finish on Crouch. Yeah.
I'm saying, like, that almost felt like a perfect execution of a week out. No bad finishes, 8 top 10 finishes. He finishes 8th. So he needs to be kind of punching up a little bit on both the bad and the good if he wants to crack much higher than this on the leaderboard.
And that's where I think similar with Hosta though. And I'm a Hosta fan for sure. But I think similar. He was like near dead last in the Olympic total. He had some great workouts, the 5K, and the ride. I think even he was like 6th or something like that. I'd sort of wonder, put him in a similar camp though. It's like it was a great weekend overall for him. He had some holes. If he's resolved those holes in the strength category and stuff like that, although he did well in the sandbag event, it'll be interesting to see if he leaps from 10th up further as you both have him. But like, I sort of wonder, it's like, we haven't seen him swim. We haven't seen him do some of the other things that they did 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, if we're going to consider sort of Boz versus Dave's games. But I don't know where the ceiling is. It's interesting when you have to rank athletes where it's like, I saw him do really well last year. I don't know if that was the perfect set of events for them, though. Or as perfect as it could be given their abilities. Like, he got a run event and he won it.
Yeah, Melanie, re-emphasizing this point. Ricky's back in the field. Justin's better than he was last year. And so more or less I have him finishing the same, 2 spots lower than what he did. Enter those 2 guys into the equation. You drop out Chandler Smith and Yonakoski, so that would be like a net difference of 2 and 2 there. Anyway, Mike, I told you we wouldn't let you do all your rankings, but I did want to get your top 3 in order. And then I have 2 questions from the audience.
They're similar to both your top 3s. I do put Adler number 1. I do feel it's very close, and it could just come down to seconds and reps sort of stuff. But then it would be Roman number 2, Ricky number 3. But I think I'm excited for a very tight race within that.
Oh yeah.
And then I'm not going to do much further, but I would put Justin, Pat, and Brent all within the next 3, likely.
Seems very reasonable to me.
Although if Spin calls me on it, I don't remember. I think it was due at like midnight on Monday, and I think at 11:45 at night, I just like woke up and was like, oh shit. And I like ran to my phone and like put in my pulse. So I would love to see that Spin puts out all of the media folks' rankings, but I have no idea what I just rattled off is the same. So I think somebody said that they liked that I'm like sitting here poking holes in your rankings. I get the ability to do that because I don't have to stand on my own, honestly. And the same goes for John in the comments and other people that like will sit there and stand on an Austin Hatfield or stand on a whoever athlete or stand on a top 40 or 39. Like all the appreciation to all of you that actually have to do that. I send one quietly to Brian, Spin, and just hope that it gets anywhere close to everybody else's. But yeah, I would put Jeff in there because I'm with you too. I feel like it's not even the best we've seen of Jeff so far.
Yeah, and people are talking in the comments about his swimming and maybe getting off to a slow start and then having to climb back up the leaderboard. Adler's clearly going to be at the front of the pack on the run, and then he'll get into the water, and we'll see how good he is. He's going to have the opportunity to show us if he's made some improvements. I saw someone referencing a last place in the swimming stuff, a decent finish, 13th on rinse and repeat, which is more of a skiing workout. But you wouldn't necessarily think that Jeff Adler is going to be the highest power output guy against the games field anyway. I think he can have a similar finish to that, 10th to 15th on the first event with the running and the swimming. And that's just fine for a guy who's, like all of those guys are going to have a finish or two in that range, even if they're competing to win. A couple of questions from the audience I wanted to get to before we end. Predictions for point spread between first and 10th. So this is a helpful graphic to look at. This depends somewhat on the amount of events that we have. I think there'll be 12 or 13 events, so it'll be more like 21 or 22 than last year here. So I do think that the top scores will be in that 1,100, 1,150 range if we have 13, 1,050 to 1,100 range if we have the top. I think that those top guys are going to have some pretty strong performances. And then I think, this is a pretty good indicator at the bottom that it's going to be about 250, 300 points from top to bottom in terms of the top 10.
That's what I was looking at. It's like 250, 350.
Yeah, so that's probably the expected range.
2 years ago, Justin and Roman were like a head and shoulder above everybody else. So,
yeah, and a lot of times half of that margin is in those top 3 guys, and then as those purple things highlight down there below, there's a tight margin. So you're usually looking at whatever the total spread of 1 to 10 is. That like half of it is the top 4, and then the rest of the guys slide into, and sometimes it's even bigger than that at the top. I wanted to just. Earlier, Ryan asked Rookie of the Year picks. I think it's going to be a tough year for rookies. Mike thinks so too. I think that I don't think, even though the women's field isn't necessarily as deep as the men's field, I just don't see any of the female rookies having top 15 finishes this year. I'm not sure if the men will either. I do think that Hatfield's a good pick for Rookie of the Year. If Gracie Walton makes the top 20, I think she's a good pick on the women's side. And it's like those are probably where I would go with those picks.
Yeah, I was sort of curious about what Dave said about it because this could factor in. It seemed like it was his call to make it only 1 Rookie of the Year versus 2, but it wasn't his call who that was, or if it was like objective or subjective. But yeah, I'd be with you. I think Amy Kringle could do well, but it's like similar to what you said about Gracie. It's like if she creeps up into the like the high side of where we think she could do, I think that could go well. And then, yeah, as much as the 3 of us and then John in the comments maybe argued about Hatfield, I feel like he's the person that I would likely think of first.
Yeah, I mean, and you could win Rookie of the Year by finishing 17th this year.
Yeah.
PC, you got to pick Rookie of the Year, male, female, or both?
They want jump.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. John didn't ask that one, but
no. I do like Pringle. I do, and I do like Annual. I like those two as my Rookie of the Years. Those who I kind of predict. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if Gracie or Jack Rosemar or Austin Hatfield ended up there. I know I have Austin Hatfield really low on my list, but like I said, I hope all these athletes prove me wrong. I really do. I want them to prove me wrong. And I have no problem. I think, like Mike says, we're putting ourselves out there, but we're not doing it out of anything spiteful. We're doing it just based on predictions, what we know, and someone's got to finish in those places. So
I think the only athlete we didn't mention that I think may have a chance is Claudia Gluck. On the women's side, I would say it's between Gluck, Walton, and Kringle. On the men's side, Hatfield, Rosema, and Anyola Kai. Those would be the 6 names that are probably the most likely rookies of the year. And I think the margins between how well those 3 athletes, male and female, do compared to each other are pretty small and are going to come down to a lot of in-competition decisions on the field of play on Friday and Saturday morning.
Yeah.
Here's another one from Bernie. Who is the biggest long odds dark horse to finish top 5? I mean, if you consider it a long odds, I would say Lazar Jukic for me. If you want longer odds than that, I would say James Sprague on the men's side. On the women's side, we're on the men's side. We'll stick with the men. So I would say either Lazar or James, coming from 2 different tiers, would be my picks for this.
I like James, and even though I have him ranked 16th, BKG.
We'll return to form. Mike?
Long odds is throwing me off, I think, as it did to you, Brian. Because I think there's names that I'm thinking of where I'm like, other people would immediately be putting them in their top 5.
Hopper's a good pick. I mean,
outside of 31st to 5th, or whatever.
Outside of Andrew, I have not seen anyone put him inside the top 5. So I think that's a fair pick. And he also.
I'm glad that Andrew and I agree on most things.
On something.
Yeah, and he also put Andrew also picked Brooke Wells 3rd, and I think he's been spending too much time talking to JR and a little bit over inflated potentially there.
Well, that's where I was like, am I saying it's insulting to say that it's a dark horse for the top 5? Because other people are just immediately maybe jumping there.
Let's say on this one here, most improved. Jason Isaac's throwing out Sahar Kaya and Luke Parker. So most improved is always an interesting one because you need to have been there the previous year in order to qualify for it.
Yeah.
Luke Parker was 28th last year, so that could potentially be. Cole Griesaber, as we mentioned, 33rd the last 2 years, so he could be a good potential pick for this. And then if you're, as far as the men go, I don't know how you quantify Hopper. Because he was 7th, then he was 31st. Yeah. Is it really most improved if he just gets back to close to where he was 2 years ago? I would say no. I would say I'm looking at an athlete who's never been up there that pushes up there. So I would discount him from that. And then you're looking at someone like maybe James Sprague, who was in 25th. But now you're talking about an Alex Kazan, Ellie Turner type of a conversation from 2 years ago or leading into last year of how high up do they have to go for it to matter. And again, on the women's side or in this award, you have to factor in the women's side. And if you start looking at the bottom of that list, there's not a lot of opportunity. You have Emma McQuaid, who is way down there, but again, she's been way up there. And then you really have to go kind of up to Abigail Domet at 26 to find a next really likely candidate for this. Sprague and Domet are good picks. They both finish in a similar range and have that potential to maybe improve by 10 spots. So those are kind of some of the names that jumped to my mind.
Yeah, and similar to Hopper, an Emma McQuaid, it's sort of she was around 12th 2 years in a row, I think. And then, she was 36 last year, didn't make the cut. If she just jumped back to 12th, I don't know that I would really.
Here's a great example of also this, unlike Rookie of the Year, which should be very obvious who it is every year, most improved can be, we've had this conversation before, it can be open to interpretation. So Wad Zombie throws out Emily Rolfe. Now, Emily Rolfe had her career best finish last year. I think it was 13th. Let me just verify that. Yeah, 12th, actually 12th. So what would it take for Emily Rolfe to even be in the conversation? Because if either Sprague or Domin improves by 10 spots, Rolfe's not improving by 10 spots. But if she improves by 6 spots and goes from 12th to 6th, you could make the argument, you could convince me that it's harder to go from 12th to 6th in the women's field than it is to go from 26th to 16th or even 12th on the women's side of things for someone like Abigail Domin.
Yeah, easily. Yeah. And that's what Jason was saying there. Yeah, what's more impressive? Jumping 25th to 16th or going from 12th to 6th. I mean, you got to look at the level of competition and, And then you also got to look at the cuts. I mean, you're jumping up. You're jumping past all these cuts as well. But that's pretty cool.
On the women's side, I'd probably lean towards Abigail Domin. Yeah.
She seems to be a good pick. I mean, obviously, she was the winner of the semifinal. We know that winning a semifinal, a la Jason Opera a couple years ago, is no guarantee of success at the CrossFit Games. We also talked about on the women's show that, I don't know that Ariel Lowen and Alex Kazan were prepping that hard for that competition because it wasn't really going to be a challenge for them to qualify to the game. So there's sometimes nuance at semifinals, which is one of the many reasons why I caution putting too much involvement in there. Yeah, John's saying for Rolfe to be considered, he needs to see her all the way up in the top 5. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And at that point, you would have to consider, because just think about the number of names that she's moving past, not to mention the addition of people like Haley Adams and Brooke Wells, and still with Tia in the field getting into the top 5. Like, that would be a tremendous achievement for Rolfe, where I would then, if I was involved in that process, say, like, we have to consider this athlete.
Well, and I think it is a bit, I would wonder how subjective it is, where if it's not, even if there was somebody that did the math, a chat or somebody's in their ear or something like that, where it's like, well, moving from 12th to 6th means this. Like, almost if it's like just a resume, Domit won the semifinal, and then she was 26 the last time we saw her at the games, won the semifinal, and then she's 12th. Like, that could equal into the whole thing. So,
right, because John throws this comment out here, like, Rosema is the real answer, and you can't get it. Well, you could say the same thing about Anyola Kai, maybe, who went from like outside of the top 20 at a European semifinal to qualifying 5th. There are guys that have, and girls too, that have made drastic improvements, but they weren't at the CrossFit Games. But according to the understanding of what that rule is, it has to be from one year to the next at the games is what they consider. So absolutely relevant to point out that there are athletes that have made bigger probably improvements that weren't there. But they won't be in the conversation until their second season.
Top training camp.
Has anyone from HQ ever shared criteria for most improved?
No.
I have. In 2019 and 21, when I was doing the script writing for the CrossFit Games, I had an opportunity, because part of the script was to write that speech, to ask about this a little bit. And I did weigh in and give my opinion, but outside of just sharing that with a person who I was working for at the time, I never got any exposure to this. So as far as I know, no, and I've been relatively close to that process a couple of years as well.
Well, and I mean, Rookie of the Year last year with Yella and Olivia, like, Olivia was the youngest athlete to ever win. She won the final. Like, there's reasons, but if you're just looking at purely 10th versus 16th, then it's just sort of like, okay, well, it's not objective, it's subjective. But
no, and I mean, look,
like,
these are
a lot of things they take into consideration. Yeah,
there might be, but these are areas that, like, I've asked these questions before, Melanie, to CrossFit, and I have gotten varied levels of responses. But I think that one of the places that we can go as a sport to help legitimize it is that when someone is new and coming to the sport and they have a question like this, that there is someone who can answer the question clearly. And as good as Dave is at a variety of different things when it comes to the CrossFit Games, through the interviews that he did this year with athletes, we also see that there's a variety of things that he's relatively uninformed about. And maybe he has an ambition to become more informed in some of those topics. But if he's not going to be, there needs to be somebody that's a spokesperson within CrossFit's public team, media team, that people can look at when they're new to the sport and say, oh, yeah, okay, this person is explaining well what's going on here, and now I have a better understanding of it.
Or they do what other sports do, where they have media and people well-informed vote on it, as opposed to having the commissioner of baseball does not decide who the MVP is or the Rookie of the Year is. the baseball writers do that. The same with the NBA, same with the NFL. It's all coaches. That's what I think. That's what it should come down to: coaches and media. You combine those two poles. That's what it's done in most every other sport. That way, you don't have one person making a decision or some biased opinion from backstage based on whatever. It's based on performance. But that's my opinion.
Have the judges weigh in too. If the person's a jerk, probably weigh that against it.
That's a separate award.
Yeah, and Spirit of the Games we know is definitely a more subjective award. But the other two, I think that there can be some concrete data that we lean on in terms of making those decisions.
Yeah.
But when it's sent a shout again, SPM. Appreciate the poundage. That's pounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Is that what you say?
You're going to be close. You're going to be not too far away from there. You got to learn. You're going to be using your own. But.
Yeah, and then T-Bird, thank you. But how do you have him lower? Oh yeah, that was in reference to Bailey, I believe. So,
yep.
But yeah, shout out to those two. Thank you for the support. And thank everyone for the support. Thanks, Mike, for coming on.
Of course.
So I think that'll do it for today. We went over 2 hours there. I'm not that surprised by it. We knew that this would be a compelling conversation, and it's really warranted. I mean, these athletes in the men's field, top to bottom, it's a really, really impressive group of athletes. Even the guys that we have ranked towards the bottom. I mean, yeah, Artur Semenov is a guy who's consistently been, looking impressive at the Asian semifinal. He hasn't been able to turn the corner at the games, but I talked to him in Saudi Arabia in February, March, and he's like, that's what I'm focused on this year. I might not be as good at semis. I'm going to be better at the games. And so he's throwing that out there to me months ahead of time. Let's see if it can come to fruition. Bruno Marins, Ruan Poitgeider, these guys that we have towards the bottom, they were impressive at semifinals. They earned a chance to be there. Someone's definitely going to surprise. We haven't had a chance to talk about everyone on this list. I'm excited to see Peter Ellis, Callum Clements. I want to see what Moritz can do this season. I feel like he's taken a next step forward. We didn't talk about Brandon Luckett. That guy is seriously fit. I just don't know how well it'll translate against this entire field. Kalian Souza took down he looked really impressive in some offseason competitions, including beating Luka Jukic and Artur Semenov out in Riyadh. So there's potential up and down this list. It's going to be awesome, and appreciate all the comments, questions, critiques. It helps facilitate the conversation. Mike, thanks for taking time on a work days, 3 days in a row to do this with us. And PC,
I'm off all next week too. I got some things to get back to here once we're done.
Yeah, PC is responsible for all the graphics you guys see on Instagram, the thumbnails for these. It's not an easy job. He takes it really seriously. So I appreciate you, brother.
Hey, no problem. Hey, don't forget, today's the last day to vote for your captains for the Tier Cup. So make sure, it was fun. Very fun. Thanks for being in there, John, and providing some comments. I know I do that enough during your show. Make sure you vote for your captains for the Tier Cup. We will, that will be announced next week and next Wednesday, speaking of John Young, on their show, who the captains are. So that'll be really cool. And then we'll have a small part in the whole Tier Cup coming up after the game. So
John, are you doing that? Are you doing that live from somewhere? Because I'm imagining that you're
it's Wednesday.
Down in Fort Worth by then.
Yeah, probably at their vendor spot. Spin headquarters.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That'd be sweet.
So again, shout out to HCR CBD for support. We're going to scan the QR code for Homegrown Relief for a chance to win $50 off store credit. Use friend20 for 20% off your purchase on HCR. Again, shout out to Asian Punch for supporting us, being our official food sponsor for the games. And trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's it. Thanks, Mike. That was awesome. Appreciate it. I don't know. I think the next time I'm on one of these shows, I'll be in Germany. So,
We'll
so
see.
unless
Safe
we
travels all the way around, guys.
Maybe we'll have a surprise show between now and the games. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. So, but appreciate everything. Live from the RV. Oh yeah, they're in the RV park. Yes, the RV park. Yeah. Thanks, thanks everyone for being in the discussion, for being a part of this, and we can't do this without your guys' support. So, like, subscribe, comments, head to our Instagram, subscribe. Make sure you follow Known and Knowable. Mike's going to have a bunch of cool stuff coming up. He's already has a bunch of cool stuff coming up. So thank you again for all your support. So on behalf of everyone here on the podcast, on the show, be friendly, our friends.